The silence before the storm. The observation deck of the Corvathian dreadnought hummed with quiet confidence as Admiral Thrakus gazed at the small blue world floating in the darkness ahead. Earth, they called it. A primitive planet on the outer edges of the galaxy, barely worthy of notice except for one thing: its location sat directly on the trade route the Corvathian Empire needed to expand its reach across 3 more sectors. Thrakus had conquered 47 worlds in his career, and this would be the 48th. He expected it to be the easiest. The Corvathians were a proud species, standing nearly 8 feet tall with thick armored skin that could deflect most conventional weapons. Their technology was centuries ahead of the humans, or so their intelligence report suggested. They had watched Earth for months, studying the divided nations, the constant conflicts, the inefficient use of resources. The humans seemed to spend more time fighting each other than advancing their civilization. It would be a simple matter to demonstrate superior force, demand surrender, and incorporate Earth into the Empire as a mining colony. The planet was rich in rare minerals that the Corvathians needed desperately. Commander Velkra stood beside the Admiral, her triple eyes scanning the tactical displays. She was one of the finest strategists in the fleet, known for her ability to predict enemy movements before they happened. Yet as she studied the data on human military capabilities, something bothered her. The humans had developed nuclear technology, which was impressive for their stage of evolution, but they had never used it in a coordinated defensive strategy. Their space program was laughable by Corvathian standards. Most of their weapons still relied on chemical propellants. It all seemed too easy. "Admiral," Velkra said carefully, "I recommend we send a diplomatic envoy first. Establish contact and assess their willingness to negotiate." Thrakus laughed, a deep rumbling sound that echoed through the chamber. "Negotiate? With primitives? They will see our ships and understand immediately that resistance is futile. We will give them one chance to surrender peacefully. If they refuse, we will demonstrate our power on one of their smaller cities. That will convince them." He gestured to the communications officer. "Prepare the message. Send it on all their broadcast frequencies. I want every human on that planet to hear it." Down on Earth, the message arrived during what historians would later call the most ordinary Tuesday in history. People were going about their daily lives, commuting to work, arguing about politics, watching entertainment shows, completely unaware that their entire existence was about to change. Then, simultaneously across every television, radio, phone, and computer screen, the message appeared. The face that materialized was alien yet somehow familiar in its expression of cold authority. Admiral Thrakus spoke in perfectly translated English, his voice devoid of emotion. "People of Earth, I am Admiral Thrakus of the Corvathian Empire. Your world has been selected for incorporation into our civilization. You have 24 hours to surrender unconditionally and accept our governance. Resistance will be met with overwhelming force. We are not cruel, but we are absolute. Choose wisely." The transmission ended, leaving billions of humans staring at blank screens in stunned silence. For several minutes, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then the chaos began. In Geneva, the emergency session of the United Nations descended into pandemonium. Representatives shouted in dozens of languages, some demanding immediate surrender, others calling for military action, still others insisting the entire thing was an elaborate hoax. Dr. Sarah Chen, the Secretary General's chief science advisor, stood at the podium trying to restore order. She was a quantum physicist who had spent her career studying theoretical possibilities of extraterrestrial contact. Now faced with the reality, she felt woefully unprepared. "Please," she called out, her voice barely audible over the chaos. "We need to respond rationally. Fighting among ourselves is exactly what we cannot afford right now." Her words went largely unheard as the arguing continued. In Moscow, the Russian premier convened his military council. In Washington, the American president activated emergency protocols. In Beijing, ancient war strategies were pulled from historical archives and studied for any wisdom they might offer. Across the world, every major power began preparing for a war they knew they could not win with conventional means. But in a small laboratory in Tokyo, something different was happening. Dr. Kenji Tanaka sat alone in his workspace, surrounded by prototypes and equations that covered every available surface. For 15 years, he had been researching theoretical energy weapons based on quantum entanglement principles. His colleagues had called him obsessed, his funding had been cut repeatedly, and most of the scientific community considered his work impossible. But Kenji had never stopped believing. Now, as he read the alien message for the 5th time, his hands were shaking not with fear but with a strange excitement. "They think we are primitive," he whispered to himself. "They have no idea what humans can do when we are pushed to the edge." He pulled up his most recent calculations, the ones that had failed in his last test 3 weeks ago. The energy requirements were still impossibly high, but what if he had been thinking about it wrong? What if instead of trying to generate the power, he could redirect it? Borrow it from the alien ships themselves. The idea was wild, possibly insane, but it was the first spark of hope he had felt since seeing the message. Across the Atlantic, in a cramped apartment in London, former British Army Captain James Morrison was having a very different reaction. He had left the military 5 years ago after a mission went wrong, blaming himself for the deaths of 3 soldiers under his command. Since then, he had been drifting through life, working odd jobs and trying to forget. But when the alien message played on his television, something inside him clicked back into place. He knew what invasion looked like. He knew what it meant to be outgunned and outmatched. He also knew that the biggest military in the world could be brought down by determination, creativity, and a willingness to sacrifice everything. James grabbed his phone and started making calls to old military contacts. Most did not answer, probably too busy with official channels. But a few did, and they were thinking the same thing he was. If the governments were going to surrender or fight a conventional war, they needed something else. They needed people willing to think outside the rules, to try tactics that no military manual would ever approve. They needed guerrilla warfare on a scale never before attempted, using every trick humanity had ever invented plus a few they would have to create on the spot. Meanwhile in Sao Paulo, Brazil, teenage programming prodigy Maria Santos was doing what she did best, hacking. Within minutes of the alien broadcast, she had tracked the signal to its source and begun analyzing its structure. The aliens had made a mistake by using human communication networks. They had opened a door, and Maria intended to walk right through it. Her fingers flew across her keyboard as she assembled a team of the best hackers she knew from online forums. They came from 12 different countries, spoke 8 different languages, but they all understood code. And if these aliens used technology to control their ships, then that technology could be compromised. As the first hours of humanity's deadline ticked away, 3 separate groups were forming, each unknown to the others, each approaching the problem from a completely different angle. Dr. Tanaka worked on his impossible weapon. Captain Morrison organized his underground resistance network. Maria Santos and her hackers probed for weaknesses in alien systems. None of them knew if their efforts would matter. None of them had any reason to believe humanity could win. But they also shared something fundamental: they refused to simply give up and accept slavery. In orbit, Admiral Thrakus watched the chaos unfold on Earth's communication networks with satisfaction. The humans were doing exactly what he expected, panicking and fighting among themselves. By this time tomorrow, they would be begging to surrender just to end the uncertainty. He had seen it happen on every world he had conquered. Fear was a universal constant, and these humans were showing all the signs. He retired to his quarters confident that the next day would bring complete victory. But he had made a critical error, one that would prove fatal to his plans. He had studied human history but he had not understood it. He had seen the wars and conflicts and assumed they made humans weak. He had not realized that those same conflicts had forged something unique in the human spirit, something that no other species in the galaxy possessed in quite the same way. Humans had learned, through thousands of years of struggling against impossible odds, that the only time you were truly beaten was when you stopped trying. The countdown had begun, and Earth would never be the same. When giants stumble. The 24 hours passed faster than anyone thought possible, yet slower than any human could bear. As the deadline approached, the Corvathian fleet descended from high orbit, positioning their dreadnoughts over major cities across the globe. Their ships were massive, each one several kilometers long, their hulls shimmering with energy shields that could deflect anything humanity's militaries could throw at them. Admiral Thrakus had chosen his demonstration target carefully, Mumbai, India, a city of 20 million people. It would send a message that could not be ignored. The admiral stood on his bridge, surrounded by his officers, as the countdown reached its final moments. The humans had not responded with surrender. Instead, their military forces had mobilized, their primitive aircraft and missiles positioned uselessly around their cities. Thrakus almost felt sorry for them. Almost. He nodded to his weapons officer. Target the industrial sector. Minimize civilian casualties. We need workers, not corpses. Fire when ready. The weapons officer's claws moved across the control panel, charging the main plasma cannon that had destroyed fortified bunkers on a dozen worlds. But in that precise moment, three things happened simultaneously, each one the result of desperate human innovation working against impossible odds. In Tokyo, Dr. Tanaka activated his prototype quantum entanglement field generator for the first time at full power. The device, cobbled together from university equipment and parts he had bought online, created a field that did something no Corvathian scientist had thought possible. It entangled the energy signatures of the alien ships with a series of harmonic resonators Kenji had positioned around the city. When the plasma cannon fired, the entanglement field caught a tiny fraction of its power and amplified it through quantum superposition, feeding it back to the emitter source exponentially. The result was spectacular and terrifying. The Corvathian dreadnought above Tokyo suddenly began vibrating at a frequency its shields were never designed to handle. Warning alarms blared throughout the ship as systems overloaded. The shields collapsed in sections, and the ship's own weapon energy began tearing through its hull from the inside. Within 30 seconds, the entire vessel was breaking apart, massive chunks of alien technology raining down into the Pacific Ocean. 12,000 Corvathian warriors died before any of them understood what had happened. Admiral Thrakus stared at his tactical display in absolute shock as the marker for the Tokyo dreadnought simply disappeared. "What just happened?" he roared. "How did they destroy our ship?" But before his officers could even begin to analyze the data, the second human counterstrike hit. Maria Santos and her global hacker collective had spent 23 hours probing the alien communication networks. They had discovered something interesting. The Corvathians used a centralized AI system to coordinate their fleet movements. It was efficient and logical, exactly what a technologically superior species would design.